Welcome, Arizona. Thank you for being with us,
for
please.
Having me. Hi, everyone. So nice to be here.
Welcome to CogX. Now, you were on our main stage here at the O2. Top takeaway, thoughts so far?
I was on a session about net zero and how we are getting there or not getting there toward net zero. And a few key takeaways were that all of us on the panel were in agreement that we're not getting there properly and we need to be doing a lot more. And also that net zero, if you look through a carbon tunnel, isn't going to win.
Yeah.
Like, it's just not enough. If we have net zero carbon emissions as our biggest target and our overarching theme in the sustainability narrative and the mainstream climate narrative, we're going to lose on so many other fronts that it's not even worth it. And those other fronts would be biodiversity, there'd be water purity, there would be plastics, there would be poverty. It's just the list goes on and on of other equally important ideas. Yeah.
So to what extent is your sense that this is incremental, slowly but sure change, or are you seeing clues that people are finally waking up and smelling the coffee?
People are waking up. I see people waking up all the time and smelling the coffee. Great expression. I don't like it when I hear, oh, one step at a time, we'll get there. I'm like, yeah, that would have been an amazing approach had we started 45 years ago, but we didn't. So we need to do a different approach now.
So Arizona, what's a big lever that needs to be thrown if you are being challenging to CogX?
Well, a big lever that needs to be thrown, of course, is regulation. Yep. We have to have rules that protect basic human rights and basic rights of nature. Rivers, we cannot pollute them. It's crazy. The level at which we are polluting and the rapidity at which we're polluting still, when we know it's wrong, we know it's a bad idea, but we still do it. Yes, so regulation, but also incentivizing. I think incentivization is so important. We need to create systems in subsidies that encourage farmers through incentives to farm in a healthy way, for instance. So cotton, leather, wool, all the things we wear. I focus on these things a lot because of my history in fashion. And all of these things are grown for us by farmers. And there's very, very little incentivization through subsidies that is actually changing the behaviors of farmers, particularly when you look at big ag.
Yeah. Now we're going to welcome questions in 2 minutes. However, I want to give you the chance to talk about Charity Dirt.
Dirt is a charity that I started 2 years ago, and I started it because I saw a real need to support soil regeneration as a climate tool. It's one of the least expensive things that we can do and one of the most useful and effective tools we have in this climate and ecological crisis that we are in right now. Yep. We are a fundraising charity open to donations. We send money straight out to farmers all over the world, supporting them to make better decisions around chemicals, and we have an emphasis on non-food crops because almost half the crops that we grow in the world are actually not tomatoes or potatoes. They are cotton, wool, silk, all the things that we wear. And so this is what Dirt does, and we look to partner with businesses who have extra cash sitting around and want to put it to a good place. Please think of Dirt.
Right, so we need to talk to you more about that. Okay. And in very broad terms, our theme is how do we get the next 10 years right? Yeah. Give us your big thought on that.
Well, there's so much to be done in agriculture, and so much of getting the next 10 years right has to do with agriculture, because 37% of Earth's terrestrial land is farmed. So we have access to that land already. We're actively working on that land. So let's start there by reducing chemicals to zero, because of course the agricultural chemicals do not stay on the land on which you spray them. They flow right off with water into rivers and lakes and oceans and pollute the entire world. So this is why our oceans are dying. This is partly why the water in the oceans is so acidic. And when you have higher acidity levels in oceans, the creatures who have evolved over millions of years to live there no longer find it a hospitable place to live. It's a big problem. And then couple that with overfishing, and you have empty seas. And then those oceans cannot sequester the carbon that we need, can't do anything anymore, actually. Yeah. So this is the vision I have for 10 years from now, when we have a much healthier planet. It's because people have found it within themselves to connect to our Earth, to realize she is so important, and the relationship that I can build with the being of the Earth beneath me is more valuable than anything else I have. And I can use me as a tool to create a better future for the Earth, meaning, oh, what job do I have? Okay, let's use my job as a tool to make this business a better place,
Yes,
to make this government a better place.
And we might talk about how we have become so disconnected as we make the most of our time today. Questions, it could be something that's already been said, it could be very open. I see Alan in the front row here, but I'm looking around as well. Who's got a question for Arizona? Raise your hand and we can work. Would you just go second row and then we'll go front row? Thank you. Feel free to say where you're from or who you are. You don't have to.
My name is Helena, and I used to work within the financial services, and then I moved into fintech, but I have a really, really deep passion for soil regeneration. So when you mentioned that, it was a great thing to hear. I want to know if you have any ideas of how to tackle the issue of education, because first of all, people are so far disconnected from where everything comes from the clothes that they wear to the food that they consume. How do we start tackling that? Because you have to tackle it at quite a young age in order to connect the children to what it is that they are using, so that when they reach a level where they are now making decisions that influence how the institutions are going to be tackling these issues, they have a deep connection and a deep sense of the responsibility of looking after the planet.
Right. Great question, thank you.
Great question. I'm really passionate about education for children and adults. I have 2 children and I am an adult and I think all of us need a lot more education and we need space for that. I would really appreciate it if our society allowed more space for adult learning. It seems to me like it's sort of acceptable that you finish your school and you're done learning and then you go and do something else, like work and produce something, and your productivity levels are there, then after that is what is valued. And we could change that. I mean, we fabricated this society. We can make it however we want it to be. We can change the rules. We need to change the rules. So I'm really excited about a future where perhaps part of everybody's job is to have X amount of hours a year that must be devoted to learning, and it doesn't have to be job relevant. It could just be learning about something that you're passionate about.
So what's your advice to how a fashion company could play a role in education without being seen to preach,
or
lecture,
greenwash?
patronize, greenwash? How do they tread that line?
Giving money to education centers?
Yeah.
Sometimes we need to decouple. Sometimes it's okay not to do it all and better not to do it all. And I think that, does anyone else think that the education sector needs more money? I think it does. And if we had businesses who were actively giving more money toward the education sector, whether that be for children or adults, preferably both, I think we'd find ourselves in a much better place. But we don't have a business sector that's actively supporting the education sector. And that would be pretty great if we did, if it were sort of built in.
Yeah. Love to get another question. We're going to get many more in. I see you there. Please.
Thank you. On a similar theme, Alan Greenberg. I used to work at a little company called Apple. I was Apple's education director previously. I have a portfolio of education, health tech, and conversational AI businesses. But if I may say, I think you are a very special person. And let me try and explain what I mean by that. No, I'm serious for a minute. The problem with the subject matter you're talking about is it's very dry. It's based on science. Science and research tends to be written in language that very few people understand and even fewer people read. So the role that you have is the dissemination of that research into something more tangible, something more communicative. Also, I would respect your experience as a model, a successful model, and as a communicator. It helps and enhances that. So I think there is a greater interest in someone like yourself and others who also have taken this journey to communicate, to educate, to mentor, to support. And I'm keen to have your thoughts on that, please.
What's coming to mind is, first of all, thank you so much for saying those kind words. That's really nice. I love hearing that. I absolutely love being a climate activist. It's brought so much joy to my life, paradoxically, because you'd think that maybe it would make me really depressed, because I do know a lot about the future that we're headed toward. I read about it all the time. I listen to so much information about it, and actually I feel really good. I feel really good because I'm doing something about it. I feel empowered, and I'm constantly in touch with the empowered people all over the world who are also doing something about it. So I highly recommend climate activism. It's really fun. And I think that what's coming to mind when I hear you speak is that I often find that scientists have, in a way, their hands tied. They're very creative people, but they don't get to be creative in science, because science says, study this one thing. You have funding to study that. but don't notice anything else that's going around it. That's not part of this observation. We're human. Humans can't just go, oh, I only see this and I'm just going to ignore everything else and it must be disconnected. Everything is connected, and I feel like you have more to say. Go ahead.
I mean, for example, I don't totally agree with you.
Okay.
I just think it's a skill set. I think academics have a skill set which is known to them. But I think that when you disseminate that research into something more tangible, if you take Anya Hindmarch, who I know you know, and Anya is someone I have a huge amount of respect for. If you look at the work that Anya's done, she runs a very successful business, but she has a voice, she communicates. Am I allowed to use the word influencer? Is that in any way being unrespectful?
No, not at all.
That
It's a great
influencer
word.
piece is key. And you as a young woman, you as the person doing what you're doing, can have a huge influence on the current generations and future generations because of who you are, where you come from, and your heritage.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Arizona. And I would get more questions in. Let's come down here, and then we'll go across here. I'm looking out. If you've got other questions, thank you. We'll come to you afterwards. Thank you.
Hi, Arizona. Alan Davidson, Soundbite, CBS News. I was just at DLD in Munich, and there was a conversation about circularity. One of the people talked about soil regeneration, or actually a panel, David Kirkpatrick and a few other people with him. One of the things that was striking was actually how much impact it can have on the carbon footprint doing that. And
Massive.
that was real discovery for me and for many other people. Maybe you could just talk a little bit for a moment about how much of an impact
Sure.
it can actually have and how relatively easy it is to do compared to other impossible
Amazing.
things.
Let's talk first about soil. So what even is soil? I used to think it was this brown blanket covering the earth that was kind of, like this around everything, and that was it. It was one composite. It was one material. And now when I think of soil, because I've learned a lot more about it, it's not one thing. It's made of trillions of tiny little things that are all alive within it. And those tiny little microorganisms, they are busy. They're kind of working and eating and pooping and having babies. They're making more soil as they live. And this is what healthy soil is. And when soil is healthy, it looks dark and it's very aerated and light, and water can permeate through it really easily and sink down, and the roots of plants are going in it very easily. They make headway. And all of those microorganisms also include fungal networks. And the fungal networks and the bacteria are all handing nutrients to the plants. That's where they get their nutrients, plants. They don't just get it directly from soil. They can't. That's not how plants work. Isn't that interesting? They grow in soil, but they can't just feed directly from soil. They need the microlife within soil. And that microlife is, because it's constantly eating, this is what is sequestering carbon, and it's the plants who hand the carbon down to the microorganisms through photosynthesis. It's an amazing cycle. And the plants above the soil keep it cool, because think about a tree. It's like 250 layers of shade cloth. So it's really, really keeping the ground temperature so much lower. And that microlife thrives in that cool, wet climate just under the surface. And when we clear cut a forest, we let the sun through. Or when we harvest an entire field, we let the sun bake that soil. And all those microorganisms, they dwindle. They get way too hot. They get dried out. The soil starts to go like this and get really compacted, and it gets hard. And then when it rains or when it's irrigated, the water just kind of slicks off the surface and doesn't penetrate down into the soil. And so you start a cycle of death, really, on soil. And it's very, very unhealthy, and it heats up so much. So this is why we call climate change global warming, is because it is getting hotter. The planet at its surface level is getting hotter. And it's because we're taking away all the vegetation, whether that is from cutting down forests or from agriculture, because much of agriculture is about having bare land a lot of the time in conventional agriculture, whereas in regenerative agriculture, like the charity that I started, we support biodynamic farming, which is one type of regenerative agriculture. They're all amazing. There's rarely any bare ground, rarely, because you have multiple different crops. You harvest them at different times. They're intercropped. It's when you grow lots of crops together, it's called intercropping. And so you don't have these big swathes of bare land to dry out and release carbon up into the atmosphere. So as I said, 37% of our terrestrial land is farmed right now. So let's do that well. Let's support regenerative agriculture to farm our 37%, at least keep that part really well covered and moist and filled with microlife down beneath the surface. And all businesses who source agricultural products can get behind this with their sourcing power. Right. So whether you're a food business or a fashion business, you can say, where do I get my cloth from? What kind of farmer was growing this? And that question is not an easy question to answer in the fashion supply chain as it is set up right now. So a fashion brand might ask that question of their first tier supplier, and the first tier supplier might say, I don't know. And then they have to go to their third tier supplier and go, where does it come from? They might go, oh, here, and then ask there, and then ask there, and getting that answer back up the chain. It's a very long process. Watch a film about it. It's called Fashion Reimagined. It's a beautiful designer called Amy Powney, who has Mother of Pearl, and she, in this film, tells her story about how she became a sustainable brand. It's fantastic.
So this is the problem with CogX. My reading list, my viewing list grows and grows, and that's the next 3 months.
Yeah.
There was a question back here, if it still stands, and then we'll come back to the front, and I see you there as well. Please.
Hi. Thank you for your talk just now. I was listening to the one upstairs as well. So I was actually quite interested in, you mentioned the kind of like supply chain. So I'm from Malaysia, obviously big like palm oil plantations and stuff like that. So I was wondering like if you are working with any of the kind of like small landowners or small farmers that are oftentimes so separate from the end user, right? So someone buying a t-shirt here, but not just that, but also separate from the big orgs that have HQs in far, far away places, and how what does regenerative look like for these small farmers who often don't even own the lands that they are farming on, firstly, and then what like good practice looks like for them. So super interested in like whether that's dissemination of like knowledge and practice and things like that, but also, taking into like the cultural nuances and all that kind of stuff that comes with, it being such a complicated supply chain, to your point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we work a lot with these smallholder farmers, and I think I'd like to start by saying, let's also just give them the power back. They know what to do. It's often the smallholder farmers, who are often women, who still hold the indigenous knowledge of how to look after that land. And we just need to go, thank you for doing it like that, and support the system to allow them to be able to sell their produce in a way that suits them, because this is where the exploitation happens, is that when they go to sell their produce, often it can become very challenging for them to get a good price, because we have a distribution system that likes to buy really massive quantities, and it likes to have distributors who buy small quantities, put them together, you get it, it gets bigger and bigger. And so there's a lot of exploitation that happens at each exchange, and this is one of the biggest, it's a systems change problem that we need. We need to find a way for small farmers to be able to access a market where they are valued for the practices that they're doing, and that customers not being me who's buying a pair of jeans, for instance, but customers being the brand who's making the pair of jeans, is looking to build direct relationships with small farms, so that the small farmer can be selling directly to them, and also they can share the risk. And this is where big system change will happen.
Arizona, can I ask you a bigger question on that, though? Back to William's point just briefly around effective altruism, you could spend your time with an individual farmer, for example, or with limited time and resource with a politician or an editor with potential to impact millions of people. How do you decide how you're going to invest your time?
Everything has value, right, in different ways, and it's difficult to quantify value, and so we always need to be very careful that we're aware of that, because it may feel less valuable to spend time talking to a smallholder farmer because you're not affecting change with millions of people. But when you affect change with millions of people, say you speak to a magazine and you could measure that and say, well, they have access to X amount of people, you don't know that those people are all going to change. I feel like I've thought about this a lot, actually, and I use my intuition sometimes, because I think that sometimes you can't just look at the numbers over and over and over again. You can't. It just doesn't they don't compute sometimes. And also, we don't know what mistakes have been made while we get to those numbers. Like, they're not as reliable as we think, numbers and spreadsheets.
Well, it will continue to fascinate me. I'm sorry, carry on.
So there's also something that is personal value, you know? Like, you can feel in your life when you're having a really good conversation and a really good rapport. And I think there's value in just trusting that and going, okay, so if I spend more time here, probably something really rich will happen. And I find that when I spend time with farmers, I really do. I feel like, wow, this is so good for me personally, and it's so good when I communicate later that I have spent this time with these farmers, because I communicate differently. I've been educated fully. I haven't just gone on a little visit and seen for a minute what's going on there. Time is, it teaches, we learn so much over more and more and more time.
Yes, and I mean, that amplification piece, I think, it contributes to that cycle.
Slowing down is really valuable.
I've got a couple of spots here. I think in the front row here, please, and then I saw something there, but I'm looking around the whole space. We've just got about 4 minutes left, so please, Andrew.
Hi, thank you very much. Andrew Gerard from C2 Capital. Arizona, you used the term greenwashing, unsurprisingly, and we heard it several times in the main session earlier, also about Microsoft's ambition to be not just net zero, but I think it's actually net negative at some point in the future. My question and my issue is more about what companies and nation states say that they're going to do about addressing some of these issues in our climate and about the earth, what we would call greenwashing. Now, for people who've perhaps not heard that term before, that's something that I suggest that people take note of, because people say that they're going to do something. How do we, or do you have some thoughts on how you as an activist and we as citizens and consumers hold our leaders and our, and I mean political leaders and business leaders to account to ensure that they actually follow through and commit on the promises that they make to us today? Right,
good question. Why don't we, with the team's help, let's just pick up this question just at the back, holding that very good question. Thank you.
All right. Hey, Arizona, thanks very much for sharing your wisdom and your passion for the topic. So I'm Stefan. I've got a 5-year-old daughter, and I've got a very pragmatic question to you. I think you've got a young daughter as well, and I'd love your advice how to get started with that journey of education in a simple, engaging way, because the topic can be quite overwhelming. And I think we talked about it earlier. There's so many ways to start and where to focus, right? In particular, through the eyes of a young lady.
Great. Thank you, Stefan.
I'll start with yours, and then I'll move on to yours about engaging with policy. I think when educating children about this, the attitude that works is, let's learn this together. Let's figure this out. Where did this come from? Hold up an apple. And then learn it together. Where did this apple? So you look at the company, then you find out and you think about where you bought it, and you do the trail with the child. My son was 6 when he's now 14, when I became really interested in sustainability and started learning, and he became my biggest confidant. I would come home, or he would come home from school, and I would go, Nico, look, this is what I learned today, wow. And then we would learn more together, and it was this we're learning together attitude that was so successful, and he knows a lot now about climate, and I would recommend that. It worked for my son, and it's working for my daughter too.
Good advice.
And
now, holding not just political leaders, but also business leaders to account.
Yeah. I, of course, shaming, blaming, or positive action comes up for me here in this question. I think it's about who you are as a citizen. Are you someone who gets a buzz out of standing up and shaming someone? And is that something you can follow through with? I don't think there's anything wrong with shaming. It's not for everyone. It doesn't work for me. It makes me shy and uncomfortable, and I feel awkward. So that's not going to be good for me to do. I have more success with positive leading because that's where I feel confident. So examine yourself, understand what works for you, and this is about you finding your own inner activist, because we all have one. We all have some part of us inside who wants to stand up and say, this is what I believe in. This is what we need to do. And I know this because I've researched it. And I know this because I feel it in my intuition as well as the knowledge that I've gathered. Yeah. And I would just say, become more sensitive with who you are inside so that you can communicate in the right ways with policymakers or business leaders, and do communicate in whatever way you find. Write emails, contact on social media. They do eventually have to take quotas and listen to the public. And I don't know. What is your 2 cents on this? Actually, do you have experience that you'd like to share?
Hi. Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to just say a few words. But yes, I'm currently working with a carbon credits company at the moment. We know that the carbon credits market has collapsed, all but collapsed, because there's a lack of transparency and no value in the credits that are being purchased by the businesses. What we are looking for are solutions for people to generate actual, real, meaningful impact on the ground, much as you talk about working with farmers. But that needs to translate into both business and political action in order to mandate it in some respects, whilst the rest of us, as you put it earlier, actually wake up to these challenges and issues. Larry Fink from BlackRock put it very succinctly about 3 or 4 years ago when he said businesses need to find a purpose in order to make a profit. But we are yet to see that really translate into some kind of like meaningful action by businesses. And my personal view is that actually we need political action on this as much as pressure being applied by us as citizens and consumers.
No, good. Now, Andrew, thank you. Arizona, I want to give you the last word. If someone sort of tuned in, not as a fashion aficionado, but just wants to educate themselves a little bit more, other than supporting Dirt Charity, where do we begin?
I would change the life that you have control over. So the things that you buy every day, every single time you make a purchase, you are able to make a choice to support one business or another. And the small businesses who are doing really good things, they really appreciate your business, and it's really nice. It feels really good. So I have a farm box that comes every week to our house filled with vegetables, and I know that it's grown really well. Mine's from Riverford, and Riverford just became a community-owned company as well, which is really cool. So they're practicing a regenerative business model as well as growing regenerative food. It's just there are so many exciting things that you can fill your days with and go, wow, that's so cool. And I'd like to say, having said all that, if you are so lucky, like I am, to walk around with money in your pockets right now, it's your responsibility to spend it wisely. It really, really is, because not everyone has that choice and that privilege to be able to choose. I'd like to buy the one that's slightly more expensive because I know it's better for the earth. So keep that privilege and be precious with it, and be grateful that you have that choice and use it.
Yeah, it's a really powerful reminder. 2 things. Firstly, on behalf of everybody, we will look at and try our best to support Dirt Charity, so thank you. But most importantly, thank you to you for being with us, for your thoughts, for your ideas, and for all the work you're doing. Arizona Muse, thank you
so
very much.
Thanks,
you.
Everyone.